Portland, October. The kind of morning that has already decided everything. 44 floors above the street, a glass tower holds its breath. Inside, 18 young professionals in pressed suits are learning what leadership looks like. The coffee is fresh. The slides are beautiful. The words on the screen say respect, inclusion, accountability. Down on the 32nd floor, a mop moves slowly across the tiles. The man pushing it keeps his head down. Gray uniform. Temporary badge. Nobody looks at him. Nobody stops. A coffee cup lands on his cart from a passing hand, the trash can 3 feet away, untouched. He says nothing. But his eyes move through the room the way a man's eyes move when he is counting something. When he is adding up a number he already suspects is very large. 1 floor below, the people learning to lead a woman moves a chair out of his way. Nobody sees her do it. He does. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not by email, not through his assistant, not filtered through 3 layers of legal review the way everything else was. By hand. Callum Holt found it sitting on his desk when he came in at 6:15 that morning. A plain white envelope, his name written in blue ink that pressed too hard into the paper, the way people write when they mean every word and don't trust themselves to say it out loud. He almost didn't open it. He had 17 reports waiting. A board call at 8. A quarterly projection that Linda Marsh had already sent him twice with the subject line updated. Please review before Thursday. He had things to do. Important things. Things that lived in spreadsheets and slide decks and conference rooms with glass walls and very good coffee. He opened the letter anyway. Mr. Holt, my name is Ray Coleman. I've worked the night maintenance shift in your building for 18 years. You don't know me. That's not a complaint. It's just a fact. I'm writing from home. Had knee surgery 3 weeks ago. The doctor says 6 to 8 weeks before I can come back. My wife says I should rest. But I've been lying here thinking about things I never had time to think about when I was on my feet. I don't think you know what this building feels like from where I stand. The people on the upper floors, they're polished. They say the right things. But after they go home, when it's just us and the mops and the empty hallways, I see what gets left behind. I hear what people say when they think no one important is listening. Sir, this company still runs, but I don't know if it still knows why it should. Respectfully, Ray Coleman, Night Maintenance, Level B1. Callum read it twice. Then he sat down, which was not something he did at 6:15 in the morning. He was a pacer, a stander, a man who held his coffee and looked out at Portland and thought about numbers and logistics and quarterly growth targets. But he sat down, and he thought about Sarah. His wife had been a community nurse for 22 years. She drove a 10-year-old Subaru and kept granola bars in her bag for patients who forgot to eat. She knew every receptionist at every clinic she worked with by first name, birthday, favorite coffee order, whether they preferred a hug or just a nod. She used to say, not unkindly, just truthfully, Callum, you run a building full of people you've never met. He'd always had an answer for that. Efficiency, scale, the impossibility of knowing everyone when you were responsible for everything. Sarah would listen to his answer, nod, and then say nothing, which was somehow worse than arguing. She'd been gone 3 years now. Cancer. Fast and then not fast enough. The kind of illness that gives you time to think but not enough time to fix anything. He had not proven her wrong. That was the thing. In 3 years he had not done a single thing that would have made her nod and say, there he is. Ray Coleman's letter was 5 paragraphs long. It felt like 18 years of evidence. Callum didn't make a plan, not immediately. He wasn't the kind of man who acted on feeling. He was the kind of man who built systems around feeling so the feeling couldn't get in the way. Except he found himself calling Garrett Owens at 7:45 that morning, his assistant, his most trusted one. When he is adding up a number he already suspects is very large. I need a maintenance uniform. Level B1, a temporary badge, a name not mine. I heard you, Garrett said. When do you need it? Sunday night. Another pause. Shorter. I'll have it in the B2 supply room, locker 7. Combination is the last 4 of your extension. Don't tell anyone. I wasn't going to, Garrett said. And then, quietly, almost to himself, she would have liked this. You know? Callum didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sunday night, 11:15. The building was quiet in the way that big buildings get quiet, not silent, just hollow. The hum of the HVAC, the low pulse of elevator machinery. Security cameras blinking their patient red dots. Callum took the service elevator to B2, locker 7. Gray uniform folded neatly. A temporary badge clipped to the breast pocket. The name typed in plain black font, Ed Walsh. He held it for a moment, then he put it on. The fit was close enough, he'd lost weight since Sarah. People mentioned it in the careful way. People mention weight loss on a grieving man. You look well, which meant the opposite of what it said. He reached into his coat pocket, took out his wedding ring, looked at it, then placed it in the breast pocket, left side, over the badge, over his heart. He walked to the mirror bolted above the utility sink. A janitor looked back at him, a tired man, older than he remembered himself being. Shoulders that carried something even the uniform couldn't cover. There you are, he thought. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Ed Walsh, or to himself. Monday morning, 6:40. Callum Ed pushed a yellow mop bucket off the service elevator and into the main corridor of the 32nd floor. The training floor, new cohort, 18 trainees starting their first full week. Nobody looked at him, not once. He positioned himself near the coffee station. Standard placement for morning setup. He'd reviewed the maintenance schedule, Saturday raise schedule, actually, which Garrett had quietly pulled from the facilities system. Ray knew this building the way a person knows their own house. Every corner, every problem spot, every place where the drain backed up on rainy days. Callum had memorized it. The trainees began arriving at 8, some in groups, some alone. All of them carrying the same things: laptops, coffee cups, the particular brand of nervous energy that looked like confidence if you didn't look too closely. He watched them the way he used to watch his own reflection before a board presentation. Checking, adjusting, making sure everything showed what it was supposed to show. A young man in a navy blazer stepped around the wet floor sign without slowing, without looking. Callum said quietly, "Watch your step." The man glanced back, irritated. Already moving on. "Maybe don't mop where people walk." A few people laughed, easy, reflexive laughter, the kind that doesn't require anything of you. Callum nodded once and kept mopping, because that was the job. Later, a woman from the marketing floor set an empty coffee cup on his cart. The trash can was 3 feet away. She said thanks while already walking in the other direction. He watched her go. 18 years, he thought. Ray did this for 18 years, not the mopping. Anyone can mop, the not being seen. The standing in the same room with the same people every single day, and being as invisible as the baseboards. The understanding that the moment you put on the uniform, you stop being a person with a name and start being a function, a role, a thing the building needs to keep running so the people inside it can forget the building needs anything at all. It was not one dramatic act of cruelty. That was what got him. It was 100 small permissions, a door left to close in someone's face. A spill walked around instead of cleaned up, a name ignored because a uniform had replaced it. He had built this, not with intention, but with absence, which might be worse. 40 minutes into the morning, a chair scraped across the floor. Callum turned. A young woman was moving it, not pulling it out to sit down, moving it out of his path before he reached the corner. She had her back to him, dark blonde hair pulled back simply, a cream blouse that had been ironed with care, black slacks, shoes that looked new, but not expensive, the kind of shoes you buy when you need to look like you belong somewhere you've never been. She turned and saw him, noticing. "Sorry," she said, not embarrassed, just direct. "I didn't want you to have to work around it." He looked at her name tag, Wren Briggs, Trainee Program, Vermont. "That's all right," he said. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, something happened that Callum Holt, who had sat in rooms with senators and CFOs and people who genuinely believed their time was the most valuable thing in any building, could not quite explain. She asked if he needed help. Not performing it, not angling it, not doing it because someone was watching. "Do you need a hand with the others?" Inside the training room, he could see the rest of her cohort, laughing too brightly at Linda's jokes, standing straighter when a manager walked past, performing belonging the way people perform it when they're not sure they have it. Wren was out here, moving a chair for a janitor. "No," he said. "I've got it." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask for anything back. "Well, thank you for keeping this place from falling apart." Then Linda called the group inside and Wren went, and Callum stood in the hallway with one hand on the mop handle and the other pressed flat against his chest where his wedding ring sat in his breast pocket. And he thought, Sarah, I think I found one. Her name was Wren Briggs and she had ironed that blouse 3 times, not because she was fussy, because it was the only good one she had and she needed it to be right. She'd packed for this week with the precision of someone who understood that the wrong detail could cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. 2 pairs of slacks, 3 blouses, all neutral. 1 blazer from a clearance rack in Burlington that fit almost perfectly if you didn't move your arms too quickly. Shoes that pinched her heels but looked the way she needed to look. She had taken a bus from Vermont, overnight, arrived in Portland at 5:50 in the morning, and sat in a diner near the station for 2 hours drinking bad coffee and reviewing her notes. Her apartment here was temporary, small, close to the freight with kindness. Close to the freight rail line, which meant the floor vibrated at irregular intervals throughout the night. And she'd learned to sleep through it the way you learn to sleep through anything when the alternative is lying awake, calculating what happens if this doesn't work. She needed it to work. Not wanted, needed. There was a difference that people who had options sometimes forgot. Her mother was recovering from a stroke. Slow work. Expensive work. Her brother Owen, 20 years old, said almost nothing. Absorbed stress the way dry wood absorbs water, had quietly picked up extra shifts at a gas station in their town without telling anyone, without complaining, without once suggesting that Ren should come home. Which was exactly why she couldn't. She had a gap on her resume from the year she'd taken off school to help at home. A year she could not explain in a way that fit neatly into a box on an application form. People nodded understandingly when she mentioned it, and then ranked her slightly lower than the candidates without gaps. Because nodding understandingly is not the same as accounting for it. This was her accounting. The training room was already full when she arrived. Not late, she was 5 minutes early, but the room already felt like it had arranged itself around certain people. Brett Carson was at the center of it. He arrived exactly at 8, which managed to feel both punctual and fashionably unhurried. Navy blazer, precisely fitted. Hair in the careful state of looking not careful. He had a kind of ease that Ren recognized immediately, not confidence, exactly. More like the assumption that wherever he entered, the room would adjust around him. Which it did. He laughed at something, and 3 people laughed with him within 4 seconds. He made a comment about a company he'd interned at in New York and mentioned it briefly. Almost as an aside, and 2 people leaned in. Linda Marsh noticed him immediately. Ren watched that too. The way Linda's attention sharpened when Brett spoke, the particular quality of her smile in his direction. Not unprofessional, just directed. Linda was 44 and polished in the way of someone who had decided, at some point, that polish was armor and had never taken it off. She ran the leadership training program with the kind of smooth authority that made you feel grateful for every piece of feedback she gave you, even when the feedback was a door closing in your face. At Holt and Brennan, Linda said, clicking to her first slide, we don't just develop employees. We develop leaders. People who know how to read a room, command respect. Step forward. Ren wrote that down, then stared at it. Step forward, she thought. Okay, I can do that. What she didn't write down, what she filed away in the part of her mind that processed things before she was ready to process them, was the question that came immediately after. What about the people who step aside so someone else doesn't have to bend down? Brett Carson was funny. Ren gave him that. He had the gift of making a room feel like it was in on the joke with him, and maybe it was. Maybe that was real. But Ren had spent 2 years working warehouse shifts in Vermont, counting boxes in unheated loading bays at 5 in the morning, with men who had been doing it for 30 years and would do it for 30 more. And she had learned a specific thing about charm. Charm that costs nothing is worth nothing. During the first break, Ren stood near the edge of the coffee station, stirring powdered creamer into coffee she didn't particularly want, but needed to do something with her hands. Brett was behind her, with 2 others, a guy named Derek Paulson, and a woman named Sophie Grant, both of whom had already arranged themselves into his orbit, with the efficiency of people who knew where the gravity was. Derek was looking out at the hallway, at Ed Walsh, slowly wiping coffee rings from a table near the wall. Is that the guy from facilities assigned to us all week? Brett glanced over. Looks like it. Good. Derek's voice had that tone, casual, not cruel, just thoughtless, which might actually be worse. We're important enough to get our own janitor. Sophie laughed. Ren looked down at her cup. It would have been easy to say nothing. Everyone else was. Brett picked up a used stir stick, tossed it casually toward the trash. It missed, landed beside the cart. Oops, Brett said. Ed's got it. He was already turning back to the conversation. Moving on. The way you move past things that don't matter. Ren stepped forward, picked up the stir stick, dropped it in the trash herself. Brett noticed, turned back, slightly amused. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said. That's kind of his job. Making the mess wasn't, Ren said. The small circle went quiet, not dramatically, not enough to become a scene. Just enough for the air to change by about 1 degree. Brett looked at her for a moment, then smiled. Not warmly. Vermont, right? She felt the word land the way he intended it to. Shorthand, unsophisticated, the wrong kind of place. Yes, she said. That explains the manners, he said. For exactly 1 second she almost laughed. That was the thing about Brett, he delivered it in a way that made laughing seem like the smart option. Like playing along was proof of sophistication. She took her coffee and returned to her seat. Across the hallway, Ed Walsh kept wiping the table, but his eyes followed her back to her chair. Callum had been in rooms with difficult people his entire career. People who took credit smoothly. People who built alliances in the 10 minutes before a meeting started. People who understood that information was currency and spent it accordingly. He was one of those people. He had been one of those people. But watching Brett Carson move through that morning, easy, effective, so comfortable in the system that he looked like he'd built it. Callum felt something he hadn't expected. Recognition, not of Brett specifically, of the mechanism. The way rooms organize themselves around certain signals. The way those signals have almost nothing to do with competence and almost everything to do with confidence, connections, the particular accent of privilege. He had risen through rooms like this. He had learned that language. He had spoken it fluently for so long he'd forgotten he'd learned it at all. And somewhere along the way, he had stopped noticing the people who hadn't. At the end of the afternoon, Callum was stacking chairs near the wall. The room had cleared. Most trainees already gone, already reviewing the day, already making the calculations of who to align with and how. The door opened. Ren. She hadn't left yet. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the half-cleared room. Then she saw him with the chairs. Are you sure you don't need help? He almost said no. He looked at the room, the abandoned cups, the notebooks left open on tables by people who'd be back tomorrow, who knew someone would handle the overnight reset, who didn't need to think about what that meant. You can grab the other side, he said. She set her bag down, crossed the room, took the other end of the stack. They moved the chairs in silence for a few minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The specific kind of quiet that happens between people when they're both doing something real. First day, Callum said. First of many, hopefully, Ren said. Was it what you expected? She thought about that. Actually thought about it, rather than reaching for the comfortable answer. Parts of it, she said. He nodded. Ed? Yeah. Do people say thank you to you much in this building? He set down his end of the chairs, looked at her. She was watching him without embarrassment, an honest question. The kind that people stopped asking because it had stopped seeming useful. Not often, he said. She nodded, like she'd suspected as much, like she was filing it away. They should, she said, and then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, grimaced slightly, the private expression of someone managing more than they'd let on, and picked up her bag. Good night, Ed, she said. Good night, he said. She walked out. Callum stood in the quiet room, stack of chairs, table with rings on it from a dozen different cups. One window, showing the sky going dark over Portland. He reached into his breast pocket, pressed his thumb against the wedding ring. I see them, he thought. I'm starting to see them. That night, later than he should have been there. Callum sat in the small security office on the maintenance level and reviewed the day's camera footage. Standard practice for Ed Walsh. Check the equipment logs, make sure the building was what it was supposed to be. He went through it methodically. Ground floor, lobby, parking structure. Then the east entrance, 9:04 p.m. He stopped. Ray Coleman was standing in the main lobby. Off hours. In street clothes, a blue button shirt, not his uniform. Using a cane on his right side for the knee. He was looking up at the building's interior atrium. The way people look at things they've known so long they've stopped seeing them. He stood there for 6 minutes. He didn't speak to anyone. Didn't approach the desk. Just stood, looking up, then turned and walked back out into the rain. Callum watched the empty lobby after Ray left. He thought about a man who'd worked 18 years in a building and came back to stand in it on a Tuesday evening, alone because he didn't know where else to go. He thought about his own building, his name on the lease, on the logo, on the letterhead, his company, his culture, his reports with the upward-pointing arrows. He thought about a file somewhere in this building with the words, contained. Do not escalate. Callum took out his phone. Garrett, he typed. Pull every internal communication from HR related to Ray Coleman. Last 2 years. and pull all investor correspondence involving Q3 expansion discussions. All of it, don't route it through Linda's office. He put the phone down, looked back at the empty lobby on the screen. Somewhere above him, 32 floors up, the training room was dark and clean and ready for tomorrow. He thought about a young woman from Vermont, a cream blouse ironed 3 times, shoes that pinched but looked right. A question asked without expectation of return. Do you need a hand? He thought about Sarah. I forgot to look down, he thought. He sat in the quiet for a long time. Then he turned off the monitor and went to get the mop. Because the floor wasn't going to clean itself, and tomorrow there was more to see. Wednesday started the way all dangerous things start, quietly. Linda Marsh walked into the training room carrying a stack of folders pressed against her chest like armor. She set them down slowly, looked at the 18 trainees the way a person looks at a hand of cards before deciding which ones to keep. Today begins your first major assessment. Everyone sat up straighter, including Ren. You'll work in teams to design a proposal improving delivery efficiency across our Northwest routes. You'll present Friday morning to senior leadership. She paused. Let it land. We're looking for strategic thinking, data clarity, and executive presence. At the phrase executive presence, Brett Carson smiled. Not big. Just enough. The kind of smile that says, I already know how this ends. Linda assigned team leads without asking anyone. She simply looked around the room. A brief scan. Like she'd already decided before she walked in. Brett, why don't you coordinate Group 3? Brett accepted with exactly the right amount of humility. Hands open. Slight tilt of the head. Happy to help. Ren sat across from him. She opened her laptop, pulled up the route data, started reading. Because that was the thing about Ren Briggs. She didn't perform preparation, she just prepared. Brett uncapped a pen like he was about to sign something important. Okay, let's think big. Automation, regional hubs, cost reduction. Leadership loves clean, scalable ideas. Ren looked at the numbers, then looked at him. Clean ideas don't always work cleanly. Brett glanced up, mildly curious, meaning. She turned her screen slightly. The Northwest delays aren't about route distance. Look here, late deliveries spike after weather events, but the scheduling software doesn't adjust. Drivers still get penalized for routes that were impossible before they started the engine. Derek leaned back, not convinced. How would you know that? I worked in a warehouse, Ren said. 2 years, small operation in Vermont, but the pattern is identical. Dispatch promises delivery windows that look good on paper. Then drivers get blamed when weather makes them impossible. Nobody laughed, which was new. Sophie started typing quickly. That's actually strong. Brett leaned forward. Interested now, really interested. The kind of interested that should have been a warning sign but felt like oxygen. Keep going, he said, and Ren did. She mapped it out across the next hour. Route software that ignored local weather patterns. Warehouse shifts understaffed during predictable rush windows. Driver feedback that never reached anyone with the authority to change anything. She knew this the way she knew her own hands. Not from a textbook. From standing on a loading dock at 5 in the morning in February. From watching a driver named Pete get written up 3 times in one winter for delays that started 40 minutes before he even got in the truck. She suggested a pilot program. Pair data analysts with warehouse supervisors and drivers before routes were finalized. Build the feedback loop from the ground up instead of the top down. Brett listened, carefully, so carefully. Ren, he said when she finished, this is really good. She felt something loosen in her chest. The specific relief of being heard. It just needs a more executive frame, he added. And there it was. Small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Ren was always paying attention. Sure, she said. I can refine the language. I'll handle that, Brett said. Easy, final. You've got the field perspective. I'll make it boardroom ready. The phrase bothered her. She filed it away, told herself she was overthinking. She was not overthinking. Outside the glass wall, Callum pushed his cart slowly down the corridor. He wasn't rushing. He was watching. He could see the shared document on Ren's laptop screen, faintly reflected in the glass. He could see her name appearing beside the framework she was building in real time. Could see Brett Carson leaning in, nodding, writing nothing himself but somehow being at the center of everything being written. Callum had been in rooms like that. He had been Brett Carson in rooms like that. Younger, sharper elbows, but the same essential motion, finding the person who understood something true and positioning himself between that understanding and the people who needed to hear it. He had called it leadership once. He was less sure about that now. That evening, Ren's apartment, 9:14 p.m. The freight train ran past and the floor shook and she barely noticed anymore. She opened her laptop, pulled up the shared document, stared at it, looked away, looked back. Because the document she was looking at was not the document she had spent 6 hours building. Her section was gone, not deleted, absorbed. Her analysis of drivers and weather patterns and warehouse bottlenecks had been restructured under a new heading. Strategic Operations Framework B, Carson. Her name had been moved down, small, a supporting role in her own work, supporting research W. Briggs. She clicked version history. There it was. Brett had edited at 7:52 p.m. But there was a second editor active at the same time, a name she didn't expect, L. Marsh. Not Brett alone, Linda. Ren sat with that for a long moment. The train had already passed. The floor had stopped shaking. The apartment was very quiet in the way of places where one person lives alone, and the silence has learned to fill the whole space. She closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it. Okay, think. This wasn't careless. This wasn't a misunderstanding about team ownership. This was two people, one of them, the director of the program that controlled whether she had a job, working together at 8 o'clock at night to take her name off her own work. She thought about Owen picking up extra shifts without saying anything. She thought about her mother's prescription cost taped to the fridge back home. She thought about the bus ride to Portland. Overnight. 5:50 in the morning. Bad coffee. Notes she'd reviewed until she had them memorized. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Tomorrow, she thought. I will say something tomorrow. Then she ironed her blouse for the next morning. Because she was Ren Briggs and she showed up. Even when it cost her. Thursday, 8:12 am. Ren found Brett near the coffee station before training began. He saw her coming and didn't look away. Didn't shift. Just waited with the particular calm of someone who has already decided how this conversation goes. Brett, can we talk about the document? Sure, you moved my analysis under your section. I streamlined it. You removed my name from the core framework. He sighed, not annoyed, patient, the more infuriating version. Ren, this is a team project. Ownership gets complicated. I'm not asking for extra credit, she said, steady. Her voice was very steady. She had practiced this in the mirror at 6 a.m. I'm asking not to be erased. Brett's expression shifted, just slightly. The warmth dialing down by one precise degree. Careful, he said. That kind of language makes you seem difficult to work with. There it was, difficult. The word that meant everything and nothing. The word that had ended more promising careers than incompetence ever did. The word that translated, depending on who said it and when to, you are making this uncomfortable for the people who have decided how things should go. Ren looked at him. Brett looked back. Neither of them said anything else, which meant he'd won for now. Outside the glass wall, Callum mopped the same 3 feet of corridor more slowly than any floor had ever been mopped in the history of the building. He had heard every word. He kept his head down, kept his rhythm, the wet mop on tile, back and forth, but something in his jaw tightened and didn't let go. That afternoon, Linda praised Group 3's draft during the review session. Excellent synthesis, Brett, she said. Warm, specific. The kind of praise that signals to everyone in the room which way the wind is blowing. This is exactly the kind of leadership lens we're looking for. Brett nodded. Thank you. The team contributed, of course. Of course. The most gracious 2 words in the language of credit theft. Ren sat with her hands folded under the table, so no one could see them shaking. She looked at the screen, at Brett's name on her framework, at Linda's smile, at the other trainees adjusting themselves subtly, almost unconsciously toward Brett, toward Linda, toward wherever the approval was coming from. She understood something then. This wasn't about one document, one project, one training week. This was what the system taught, step by step, small permission by small permission. It taught you that credit flows upward, that speaking plainly reads as aggression. That the most dangerous thing you can be in a room full of people performing competence is someone who actually has it. She looked at the window, at the hallway beyond it, at Ed Walsh paused with a spray bottle and a cloth, not quite looking in, but not quite looking away. The networking event was on the 44th floor, Thursday evening. Cocktail tables, silver trays, soft jazz playing at the specific volume of music that wants to seem relaxed but is working very hard. Ren stood near the edge of the room with a glass of sparkling water she had not touched. Around her, conversations moved in the easy rhythms of people who knew how to make a room work for them. Graduate schools, summer internships, fathers who knew someone on a board somewhere. Ren knew freight schedules, loading dock politics, the specific way your hands smell after a long shift with industrial packaging tape. She did not know how to make those things sound like currency. Across the room, Brett stood with Linda and the VP of Operations, a man named Grant Whitfield, silver-haired, measured, the kind of executive who listened carefully and said very little and made you feel like being heard by him meant something. Brett was in full form. Our proposal focuses on predictive route correction, he said. The key insight is reframing Northwest inefficiency as a coordination failure, not individual performance, systems-level misalignment. Ren's fingers tightened around her glass. Those were her words. Dressed up, reshaped, fitted with the right vocabulary. But underneath, 2 years on a loading dock in Vermont, Pete getting written up in the snow, the particular understanding that comes from doing a thing rather than theorizing about it. Grant nodded. Where did that insight come from? And Ren made a decision. She crossed the room before she could talk herself out of it. Part of it came from warehouse patterns, she said. Calm, clear. When route schedules ignore local conditions, the delay gets pushed down to drivers and dock teams. I saw that directly working freight in Vermont. Brett turned, smiled immediately. The smoothest kind of pivot. Ren brings a really valuable field-level perspective, he said. I shaped it into the operational framework. A few people nodded. Grant said nothing. Linda lifted her glass. Brett is translating raw observations into leadership language, she said. Raw observations. Ren felt the heat rise in her face. Fast and specific. Raw observations, 2 years, Dock 4, February. The way ice forms on the loading bay ramp overnight and nobody fixes it because that's maintenance's problem, not ours. Counting inventory by hand when the scanner broke for the 3rd time that month. Learning the difference between a schedule that looks efficient and a schedule a human being can actually run. Raw observations, she swallowed it. Because what choice did she have? In this room, in this moment, with Linda watching and Grant watching, and Brett standing there with his smoothly shaped framework. She stepped back. Then the glass broke. Derek Paulson, too close to the edge of a cocktail table. His elbow caught the stem, and the wine glass went over and red spread across the pale marble floor in a way that made several people step back with small sounds of concern. Brett looked toward Callum, who was already reaching for his cart. Ed, loud enough, deliberate enough. You might want to get that before someone important ruins their shoes. A pause, a smile. Careful though. That floor probably costs more than your monthly paycheck. Someone laughed, uncomfortable. The kind of laugh that fills a silence so the silence can't indict anyone. Callum moved toward his cart. Ren moved first. She crossed the floor, crouched down, took a cocktail napkin and started picking up the larger pieces of glass. Ren, Callum's voice, low, behind her, don't. But she had already reached toward the piece near the table leg. The edge caught her palm, clean, fast. She inhaled sharply. A line of blood, bright against her skin. She stared at it for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then Callum was beside her. Not like a janitor answering a call, like a man who had forgotten what he was supposed to be doing. He knelt, took a clean cloth from his cart and pressed it gently against her hand. Hold this. She looked at him. His face was controlled, very controlled. The kind of control that is itself a form of expression because of how much it's working. Angry. I'm okay, she said quietly. No, he said. You're bleeding. Just that. Simple. Certain. Like it mattered, like the noise of the party seemed very far away for a moment. The jazz, the polite laughter, the sound of people performing, belonging for each other. Brett cleared his throat. Okay, he said. This is getting a little dramatic. Ren stood slowly. Cloth pressed to her palm. She looked at Brett, at the small circle of people who had laughed because it was easier than not laughing. You can be smart, she said. Her voice shook. But it didn't stop. You can say exactly the right things in rooms like this. You can know how to position yourself and frame your ideas and make other people's work sound like yours. Brett's jaw tightened. But none of that gives you the right to make other people smaller. The room went very still, not dramatically, not in the movie way where everyone gasps. Just a stillness, the particular quiet that happens when something true is said in a room that has not heard much truth recently. Linda stepped forward. Ren. Her voice was soft, which was somehow more alarming than if it had been hard. I think you should step outside and compose yourself. I am composed. This is a professional environment. Emotional control is a leadership quality. There it was again, emotional. The red mark, the invisible stamp. The word that meant you are too much and not enough. and we have decided which one to emphasize. Ren looked at the cloth in her hand. Blood had begun to seep through. She walked out of the event, alone. Behind her the jazz started again, softer than before, as if the room needed to reassure itself. Callum watched her go. Then he looked around the room, at Linda, already turning back to Grant with a practiced smile. At Brett, accepting a fresh drink from a passing tray. At the other trainees recalibrating toward the center of gravity, the way they'd been doing all week. He thought about the letter in his desk drawer upstairs. This place still runs, but I don't know if it still knows why it should. Ray, you were right, you were more than right, late. After the event cleared, after the cleaning crew swept up the glass, Callum sat alone in the security office and watched the camera footage back. The whole thing, start to finish. Ren arriving and standing at the edge of the room. Brett with Grant, using her words with such ease he probably half believed they were his by now. The glass breaking. Brett's comment about the monthly paycheck. The laughter. Ren crouching down. The cut. Callum pressing the cloth against her hand while the jazz played and nobody moved. He watched himself do it, from above, from the security angle, and he recognized something in the way he'd crossed the room, the way he'd knelt down. He hadn't been acting like a janitor. He'd been acting like a man who had forgotten to perform anything. He'd just reacted, because someone was bleeding, because it mattered. When was the last time something had simply mattered? Then he saw something else on the footage. 9:02 p.m. East entrance, Ray Coleman. Blue button shirt, cane on the right, standing in the lobby looking up at the atrium. Again, same as Monday, standing there for 7 minutes, alone, looking at a building he had spent 18 years inside, looking at it from the lobby like someone who wasn't sure they were still allowed in. Callum's chest did something complicated. He picked up his phone. Garrett, he typed. Call Ray Coleman tomorrow morning. Tell him I would like him to come to the building on Friday. Tell him it's important. Don't say why. And make sure he can get through security without any issue. He set the phone down, looked back at the screen. Ray standing in the lobby. Ren walking out of a party alone. The cloth with blood on it left on his cart. All of it on his watch. Friday morning was coming. But before Friday there was still Thursday night. And Thursday night, Ren Briggs sat in a stairwell between the 29th and 30th floors because she needed somewhere to be that wasn't the elevator and wasn't her desk and wasn't any room in this building where someone might see her face and file it under emotional. The stairs were concrete, cold, the kind of cold that seeps through fabric. She sat on the middle step, bandaged hand in her lap, back straight even now because some habits don't break even when everything else is trying to. She was not crying. She was very close to crying, which is different. Because crying meant she believed it was over, and she hadn't decided that yet. The door opened. She looked up. Ed Walsh, standing in the doorway with a small first aid kit and a bottle of water, looking at her with the expression of a man who has seen something he cannot simply walk past. Despite everything, Ren almost laughed. Do you just appear? She said. Whenever someone's having the worst day of their life. Callum looked at her hand. Only on weekdays. She almost smiled. Almost. Then it broke. I thought if I worked hard enough, she said, it would be enough if I stayed decent, if I didn't play the games. She stopped. Started again. Maybe in places like this, being decent just makes it easier for people to step on you. Callum sat down on the step below her. Not beside her. One step lower. Leaving her the higher ground even here. That's what places like this want you to believe, he said quietly. She looked at him. The problem isn't that you're kind, he continued. The problem is a system that has learned to punish people who refuse to perform cruelty. The stairwell was very quiet. Ren studied him. The way she studied things when she was deciding whether to trust them. Carefully. Not quickly. The careful posture. The weight in his voice. The way he said things that sounded less like comfort and more like confession. Ed, she said slowly. Were you ever a manager? He looked at the narrow window across from them. Portland outside. Rain on the glass. I was responsible for a lot of people, he said, and I didn't see them soon enough. She waited. For more. He didn't give it. She nodded once, accepted it, looked down at her hand. He opened the first aid kit, checked her bandage without asking, rewrapped it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had needed to be useful in moments when words weren't adequate. She watched him do it, and she thought, this man has done this before. Not the bandage, the steadiness, the showing up. The choosing to be present when the easier thing would have been to keep walking. He finished, set the kit aside, stood to go, and as he stood, his hand caught the edge of his breast pocket. The small pen clipped there came loose, fell onto the step between them. He reached for it, but Wren's hand got there first. She picked it up. The pen was simple, dark blue, but along the barrel, engraved in small clean letters, C.H. Holton Brennan, S. 2003. She looked at it for a long moment. C.H. Callum Holt. She didn't look up immediately, didn't say anything, didn't let her face do the thing it wanted to do. She held the pen out to him. He took it. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. Then Callum Holt, CEO of Holton Brennan Logistics, owner of this building. The name on the letterhead and the lobby portrait and the quarterly reports, with all the upward arrows, walked back through the stairwell door. And Wren Briggs sat alone in the cold concrete stairwell. She looked at her bandaged hand. She looked at the door. She thought, oh. And then she thought something that surprised her. Something that rose up through the exhaustion and the anger and the bleeding palm and the document with her name removed. She thought, he's been here all week. He could have stopped any of this, at any moment. He has the power to stop all of it. And instead he's been mopping floors, listening, watching, learning something he apparently needed to learn badly enough to put on a gray uniform and pretend to be invisible. She thought about that for a long time. Then she stood up, straightened her blouse, adjusted her bandage, picked up her bag, because tomorrow was Friday, and she had an analysis to present, and for the first time all week, she thought maybe, just maybe, she was not the only person in this building planning to tell the truth. She walked down the stairs, and she did not look back. Callum did not sleep Thursday night, not because he was anxious. Anxious, he knew. Anxious had a texture, chest tight, thoughts looping, the ceiling becoming something you studied against your will at 2 a.m. This was different. This was the feeling of having looked away from something for a very long time, and then finally turning back, and finding it exactly where you left it, waiting, patient, not angry, just there. He sat at the small desk in the security office, Ray's desk technically, the one with the coffee ring stain in the upper left corner that nobody had addressed because it was the maintenance office, and maintenance offices did not get the same attention as the 44th floor. Callum looked at the stain. Then he opened his laptop. The evidence was not complicated. It never is when a system decides to protect itself. It does not need elaborate machinery. It just needs small decisions made consistently by people who have learned to call those decisions professionalism. First, the document history. Wren's analysis, built over 6 hours on Wednesday. Framework, data, pilot program structure. All of it clearly attributed in the version log. Timestamps showing her work from 9 a.m. to nearly 4 p.m. Then 7:52 p.m. 2 editors, simultaneous. Brett Carson removing her name from the core framework. Linda Marsh restructuring the document architecture. Together, at 8 o'clock at night. Not careless. Not a misunderstanding about team ownership. Coordinated. Second, the internal communications Garrett had pulled. Callum read through them slowly. Most were routine. Then one, dated 6 weeks before the training cohort was selected, from Linda to the VP of Human Resources. The Carson family's Q3 commitment is contingent on Brett's visibility within the leadership pipeline. I'd recommend we ensure his placement in the highest profile group. This doesn't need to be documented formally. He read that last sentence 3 times. This doesn't need to be documented formally, which meant Linda knew it shouldn't be, which meant she knew exactly what she was doing, which meant the decision to place Brett as team lead, the decision that positioned him above Wren's work before the week even began, was made 6 weeks ago in an email designed to disappear. Third, Ray's complaint, filed 14 months ago, 3 pages, detailed and specific and signed with the careful handwriting of a man who chose his words because he meant them. The complaint described facility staff being ignored in HR, security guards mocked by people they held doors open for, warehouse workers blamed for software failures they had no part in creating, maintenance crews working in conditions that had been reported and quietly shelved. At the bottom of the file, a single internal note, added by someone in Linda's department. Reviewed, no escalation required. Note, long-term employee pre-retirement stress, recommend monitoring. And in the status field, 2 words. Contained, do not escalate. Callum sat back from the screen. He had used that word himself, in board meetings, in crisis communication planning. When something needed to be managed rather than addressed, the word was contained. It sounded like control. It felt like competence. It meant, we have decided this does not require us to change anything. Ray Coleman was not a spill on the floor. Ray Coleman was 64 years old and had spent 18 years making sure the building Callum's name was on kept standing. He drove in through the service entrance before dawn. He knew which drain backed up on rainy Tuesdays. He had written a letter in blue ink that pressed too hard into the paper because he meant every word and didn't trust himself to say it out loud. And the system had called him a pre-retirement stress case and filed him under Do Not Escalate. Callum closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the maintenance office for a while, the hum of the building around him, the particular sound of a large structure at rest, all the systems running that nobody thought about because they always ran. He reached into his breast pocket, took out his wedding ring, held it in his palm. Sarah had been gone 3 years. He had not proven her wrong in 3 years. He had sat in rooms and read reports and accepted clean presentations because they were easier than the alternative. He had built something and then stopped looking at what it was becoming because looking required him to be in places he had decided were not his places. She used to say, "The distance between you and the people who work for you is not organizational, Callum. It's a choice you make every single morning." He had chosen the distance, every single morning for years. He put the ring back over his heart, picked up his phone. Garrett, he typed, "Tomorrow morning. Conference room A, 44th floor, full board, 9 a.m. I need 3 things on screen. The document version history for the Group 3 training project. All internal communications I marked tonight, and the complaint filed by Ray Coleman 14 months ago. Status field visible. Make sure the font is large enough to read from the back of the room." He set the phone down, picked it up again. "One more thing. Make sure Ray got my message. Make sure he knows someone will meet him at the service entrance at 8:30. He shouldn't have to ask anyone for a visitor badge. He should just be let in. Send." He looked at the gray uniform jacket hanging on the back of the chair. Tomorrow he would not be wearing it. He folded it carefully anyway, because Ray would be back someday, and it should be ready. Friday morning came in the way October mornings come to Portland. Gray sky. Certain rain. The kind of weather that has already made its decision and is not interested in negotiation. Wren was in the building by 7:40. She had slept in pieces, 2 hours, then awake, 1 hour, then awake. At 4:30 she gave up and sat at her small table near the window and reviewed her notes by the light from her laptop screen. The freight train ran past at 5. The floor shook. She barely registered it anymore. She had been running through the analysis in her head for days. Not because she didn't know it. She knew it better than she knew anything she had studied in school. She knew it because she had lived it. Because she had stood on a dock in Vermont in February and watched a system fail from the inside and understood in the specific way you understand things when your body is cold and your hands are tired, exactly why it was failing and exactly what would fix it. She knew the work. What she didn't know was what the room would do with it. She ironed her blouse, the cream one. Then she put it on and picked up her bag and went. In the elevator up to the 44th floor, she reached into her jacket pocket. The pen was there. She had carried it since Thursday night. Hadn't planned to. It had been in her hand when she left the stairwell and she had put it in her pocket and then not taken it out because taking it out meant deciding what to do with it. C.H. Holt and Brennan, Est 2003. She turned it over once, then she left it in her pocket and walked into the boardroom. The room was already arranged differently than she'd seen it before. Not the training setup, the actual configuration for serious business. Long table, board members along one side, presentation screen at the front, the kind of room that reminded you immediately that some conversations are decided before they begin. Wren found her seat in the second row. Trainee section, observer chairs. She set her bag down and folded her hands and looked at the front of the room and breathed. Brett was already there. Navy suit. The good one, the one that fit like it had been made for exactly this moment. He stood near the presentation screen reviewing something on his tablet, not nervous. Composed in the way of someone who has been told or has convinced himself that the outcome is already settled. Linda stood nearby. Polished, calm, pearl earrings. The particular still of a person who is prepared for every contingency except the one that is actually coming. She caught Wren's eye for 1 second. The look said, "You know how this goes. You know what room this is and who belongs in it, and what happens to people who forget that." Wren looked back at her for 1 full second, then looked away. Because she had decided something in a stairwell on Thursday night. She had decided it sitting on cold concrete with a bandaged hand and a pen in her pocket. She had decided it at 4:30 this morning with her notes and her cold coffee and the freight train shaking the floor. She was going to say what she knew. Whatever the room did with it afterward was not something she could control. But the saying of it, that was hers. The board members settled at 9. Grant Whitfield at the far end. 3 others whose names she knew, whose professional histories she had read on the company website the week before she arrived. Sitting across from the trainee section with the quiet attention of people paid to evaluate things. Linda introduced Brett with warm precision. Brett stood, clicked to his first slide, thanked the board with exactly the right degree of confidence and exactly the right degree of humility, and then began. It was good. Wren was not going to pretend otherwise. Whatever Brett Carson was, he was not stupid. He had taken her framework and dressed it well. The language moved with the ease of someone who had learned to speak this particular dialect. Executive, strategic, the vocabulary of people who made large decisions from high floors. He talked about predictive route correction, systems-level coordination failures, the cost of pushing accountability downward to individuals rather than addressing structural inefficiency at the source. Her words, her structure, her loading dock at 5 a.m, wearing his name. She sat still, hands folded, breathing the way you breathe when you are holding something in that needs to stay held for just a little longer. A board member leaned forward. She recognized him from the company's annual report. Older, the quality of his attention said he had heard many presentations and had learned to tell the difference between substance and performance. Mr. Carson, what practical experience informs this recommendation? Have you worked directly with drivers or warehouse operations? Brett paused, half a second, a very controlled half second. We consulted internal performance data, he said, and considered field realities from a strategic perspective. Field realities from a strategic perspective. Wren felt it move through her chest, not anger exactly, something heavier. The specific weight of watching something true be made hollow by the person holding it. She thought about Pete, written up in February for delays that started before he turned the key. She thought about Owen at the gas station, picking up extra shifts without saying a word. She thought about Ray Coleman standing in the lobby at 9 o'clock at night, with a cane and a blue shirt, and nowhere else he needed to be. She reached into her jacket pocket, felt the pen, and stood up. Linda turned immediately, sharp. Wren, questions will be taken after the presentation, with respect. Her voice shook. She let it shake. The shaking was just what happened when a person told the truth in a room that hadn't been expecting it. The field realities Brett mentioned are not abstract. I built this analysis from 2 years working warehouse shifts in Vermont, the route correction model, the feedback loop structure, the pilot program design. Those came from standing on a loading dock and watching the system fail from the inside. Brett stepped forward. Easy, practiced. The pivot he had probably rehearsed without knowing he was rehearsing it. Wren contributed some really solid ground-level observations. The team as a whole. I built the core analysis, Wren said. The room shifted, not dramatically, not the way rooms shift in stories. Just a change in the quality of attention. The board member who had asked about practical experience sat forward slightly. Grant Whitfield set down his pen. The problem isn't delayed trucks, Wren continued. She was looking at the board now. Not at Brett, not at Linda, at the people with the actual authority to hear her. The problem is that the system protects itself by blaming whoever has the least authority to push back. Drivers get penalized for routes designed to fail in bad weather. Warehouse teams get called inefficient when the schedule collapses upstream of anything they control. And nobody asks the people closest to the work what they see, because somewhere along the way we built a culture that forgot to look at them. Silence. Brett let out a short sound. Not quite a laugh. The kind of noise designed to signal that the room should find this slightly excessive. This is getting a little emotional. He did not look at Wren's bandaged hand when he said it. He looked at the board, which told her something she had not expected. That he knew, somewhere below the polish, that looking at her hand right now would cost him something he couldn't recover. So he didn't look. Linda stepped forward. I think this is not the appropriate forum. Let her finish. Quiet, certain, from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Ed Walsh was standing near the wall, gray uniform, cot beside him, a cloth in one hand forgotten. He was looking at the board, not at Linda, not at Brett, at the board. Grant Whitfield frowned. Ed, this is a closed session. You'll need to. The man near the wall began walking forward, slowly, without hurry. The walk of someone who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it. He reached the conference table. Wren moved first. She reached into her pocket, took out the pen, set it on the table in front of her. Face up, the engraving visible to anyone looking. C.H. Holton Brennan, Est, 2003. She looked at the man in the gray uniform. He looked at the pen, then at her. 1 second. No more. She had found it Thursday night and said nothing. Not because she was afraid. Because she had wanted to stand up on her own first. Before anything changed, before the power in the room shifted back to where it lived, she had wanted the board to hear her as herself, not as someone the CEO was protecting. So she had waited, and now she was done waiting. She sat down, and Callum Holt placed the name badge on the table beside the pen. Ed Walsh. Face up. Then he looked at the room. My name is not Ed Walsh. Nobody moved, not a chair, not a hand. The board members who had been about to speak did not speak. Brett, who had not stopped moving in 4 days, went completely still. Linda's face changed the way faces change when the thing you were most afraid of walks through the door and turns out to have been in the building all week. My name is Callum Holt. The silence that followed was not shock exactly. It was recalibration. The entire room recalculating everything that had happened in the past 5 days. Every small cruelty, every smooth pivot, every email sent after hours, every status marked and seen. Callum picked up the remote. The first screen showed the document version history. Clear, time-stamped. Wren's work building through Wednesday. Her name on the framework she had built. And then 7:52 p.m. 2 editors, the restructuring. Her name moved to the bottom under supporting research. The serious board member looked at it for a long time. The second image, Callum said, is an internal communication sent 6 weeks before this cohort was selected. The email appeared. The Carson family's Q3 commitment is contingent on Brett's visibility within the leadership pipeline. I'd recommend we ensure his placement in the highest profile group. This doesn't need to be documented formally. The room temperature dropped, not metaphorically. Something physical happened in that space. People who had been sitting comfortably sat differently. Brett was very still, not the practiced stillness of composure, the stillness of someone who has just understood that the floor they were standing on was built on something that is no longer there. Grant Whitfield looked at Linda. Linda did not look back. You placed Brett Carson as team lead, Callum said before the program began. Not based on performance assessment, based on a financial arrangement you did not disclose to the board, or to me. Linda opened her mouth, closed it. The third image appeared on screen. Ray's complaint, all 3 pages. The careful typed text that had once been careful blue handwriting. And at the bottom of the file, in the status field, in plain black type, contained, do not escalate. Callum let the room look at it. He did not explain it. It did not need explanation. 2 words that told the whole story of what this building had decided certain people were worth. Ray Coleman worked in this building for 18 years, Callum said. He filed a detailed, specific complaint about conditions in the facilities and maintenance levels 14 months ago. It was reviewed once, marked as stress-related, and buried. He set the remote down on the table. I spent this week as a janitor because I stopped trusting reports that told me everything was fine. What I found was not one bad hire, not one manager making a bad call. I found a culture I helped build by being absent from the floors below me, by accepting presentations instead of asking questions, by letting the distance between this office and the people who actually run this company become something I forgot to notice. He looked at Brett. Ambition is not the problem. Using other people as steps is not leadership. It is just taking, and this company will not build its future on people who take. He looked at Linda. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending an independent investigation. That investigation will cover the document manipulation, the undisclosed financial arrangement with the Carson family, and the handling of Ray Coleman's complaint. Linda stood very straight. Callum, if we could discuss. The investigation will determine what needs to be discussed. She stopped. The room held its breath. Then the door opened. It opened slowly, the kind of slow that means the person on the other side is being careful, managing a cane on the right side and 18 years of never having been on this side of that door. Ray Coleman walked in, blue button shirt, pressed, collar straight, his good shoes, the ones his wife made him keep for occasions, though he had not been sure this counted, as an occasion until Garrett called him that morning and said Mr. Holt would like you to be there. And he had understood, without needing it explained, that it did. He looked at the room, at the board members in their chairs, at the projection screen still showing his complaint, at the 2 words in the status field still visible to everyone: contained, do not escalate. He looked at them for a moment, then he found a chair at the back of the room and sat down, slowly, set the cane against the wall, placed both hands on his knees, the way he sat when he was settling in for something that mattered. He did not say anything, he just sat there, in the room, present, alive, seen. In 18 years Ray Coleman had cleaned this floor, had polished the glass on those windows, had replaced the bulb in the conference room light fixture twice. Once at 2 in the morning when the overnight team needed it working before a 6 a.m. call. He had done all of that without ever sitting in one of these chairs. He sat in one now. Callum looked at him. Ray looked back. Something passed between them that had no business being in a boardroom except that it was exactly where it needed to be. A reckoning between 2 men who had occupied the same building for 18 years without once being in the same room. Between the man whose name was on the door and the man who cleaned the door, and the long distance between those 2 things that should never have been allowed to grow so wide. Ray gave one small nod. That was all. Callum looked down at the table, at the badge, at the pen, at the 2 small objects that stood for the strangest week of his professional life, and probably the most necessary. He thought of Sarah, briefly and completely, the way you think of someone you have loved when you have finally done the thing they always believed you were capable of. There, he thought. There it is. Then he looked at Wren. Miss Briggs, would you present your analysis? Not a question. An acknowledgement of everything she had brought into this building. Everything that had been taken from her and not returned until this moment. Wren stood. She walked to the front of the room. Her hand shook once when she reached for the remote. One visible tremor. She did not hide it or apologize for it. It was just what hands did sometimes when a person had been holding something tightly for a very long time and was finally allowed to set it down. She clicked to the first slide. The core inefficiency in our Northwest routes is not distance, she said. It is accountability displacement. She talked for 22 minutes about drivers and weather, about dock schedules that collapsed upstream and got blamed downstream, about the specific way a system fails when the people running it have no channel to tell anyone what they are seeing, about a pilot program that would put data analysts in direct conversation with warehouse supervisors and drivers before routes were finalized, not after problems emerged, before, at the design stage, when the information could still change something. She talked about cost, not in the abstract language of strategic frameworks, in actual numbers, actual routes, actual weather windows in the Pacific Northwest from October through March. The serious board member asked 3 questions. Technical, specific. She answered all 3, without hesitations, because she had thought about all 3 at 4:30 in the morning, and at 5 in the afternoon in the training room, and on the bus from Vermont, and on a dock in February, and in every moment she had spent understanding a problem rather than learning to describe it. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody reframed her points in a more executive register. Nobody called her observations raw. When she finished, the room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something real has been said, and people are actually thinking about it, rather than preparing their response. Grant Whitfield looked at his notes, looked up. How long would a pilot program take to generate meaningful data? 90 days, Wren said. If we start with 2 routes in the Cascades Corridor and 1 in coastal Oregon, we'd see delay reduction data inside the first 60. Grant wrote something down. The serious board member was writing too. Brett Carson was looking at the table. He did not look up when Wren was speaking. Not once. And there was something in that, Wren thought, that was more honest than anything else he had done all week. He knew. He had always known what he was taking. He had just decided the taking was acceptable, because the system around him had spent years teaching him that it was. She did not forgive him for it, but she saw him clearly, which was different, and clearer than she had seen him before. The board stayed for another hour. Questions for Callum about the investigation process. Questions about the financial arrangement with Brett's father and how it had moved through the company without board visibility. Questions about the complaint process and what it would look like going forward. Callum answered them without deflection. He did not minimize what had happened, He did not use the language of isolated incidents or bad actors or systemic challenges. He said, "I created conditions that allowed this, and I am going to spend the next period of time changing them." Starting today, the board voted on 3 immediate actions. Linda Marsh would be suspended pending an independent investigation. Brett Carson would be removed from the leadership program. His father's Q3 investment would be flagged for independent ethics review. Wren's pilot program proposal would be moved to formal evaluation within 30 days. 3 votes, all of them unanimous. The meeting ended. People began to gather their things. Conversations started in the low, careful tones of people processing something they had not expected to be processing. Wren sat in the second row. She did not move immediately. She let the room empty around her. Watched Grant Whitfield stop at the door and say something quietly to Callum. Watched 2 of the other board members speak to each other. Watched Brett walk out without looking at anyone, his tablet under his arm, his good suit doing its best in a room that no longer required it. She looked at the pen, still on the table. She walked up and picked it up, held it for a moment. Then she looked at Callum. He was looking at her. "Thank you," he said. Quiet. Meaning all of it. The chair on Monday morning and the pen on Friday morning and every moment in between. "You would have done it anyway," she said. "Maybe," he said, "but not the same way." She held the pen out to him. He took it, and for a moment they both had their hands on it. Her giving, him receiving. The ordinary transfer of a small object that meant something neither of them had a word for yet. Then she let go, and walked out into the building that was going to be different now. Not all at once. She understood that. Real things don't change all at once. They change in policy meetings and performance reviews and small daily decisions made by people who have decided to do things differently. They change slowly and imperfectly, and sometimes they slip backward and have to be caught and corrected. But they change. The aftermath moved the way real things move, in paperwork, in difficult conversations in offices with closed doors, in the particular quiet of a role being handed back to HR after the person who held it is no longer there. Linda Marsh resigned 4 weeks after the investigation began. The official announcement was careful. Everyone who had been in that room on Friday morning understood what it meant. Brett Carson left the program on the following Monday. He did not say goodbye to anyone in the cohort. He did not email Wren. He walked out carrying the same tablet he had carried in and did not look back. His father's Q3 investment was reviewed, flagged, and ultimately declined by the board. Callum stood in front of the table and said it plainly. If we need that money more than we need our integrity, we have a larger problem than one bad quarter. Nobody argued. The trainee program was rebuilt over the following 2 months. Anonymous complaint routing to an independent panel. Team leads determined by assessment after 2 weeks of observation, not assigned on the first day. A mandatory rotation that put every leadership candidate in direct contact with warehouse staff, drivers, and facilities crews before final evaluation. Not as a symbolic gesture, as a requirement with teeth. Ray Coleman came back in November, not to mop floors. Callum had called him directly, had explained what he wanted. An operational culture advisor, part-time, flexible hours. A person who walked the building and told the CEO what he actually saw. Ray looked at the job description for a long moment. "This is a very fancy title," he said, "for a man who still knows where every mop in this building is hidden." Callum said, "You wrote me a letter that told the truth when every other document I was receiving told me something easier. I need that more than I need another analyst." Ray was quiet for a moment. "My wife says I need to get out of the house," he said finally. "She says I'm reorganizing things that don't need reorganizing." "Your wife sounds like a perceptive woman. Don't let her hear you say that," Ray said. "She's already very confident about it." Callum laughed, a real laugh. The kind that surprised him by arriving when it did. He had not done that in a while. Ray started the following week. His first report was 4 pages. Handwritten. About the loading dock drainage issue that had been causing problems on rainy mornings for 3 years and had been mentioned in 4 different maintenance logs that had never been routed to anyone with the budget authority to fix it. Callum read all 4 pages. Then he called facilities and approved the repair the same afternoon. Wren Briggs was hired as operations analyst in December. The panel was independent. 3 members, none of whom reported to Callum. He was not in the building the day the interviews were conducted. He had put it in his calendar 2 weeks in advance and told Garrett to hold it clear. Not available. Candidate interviews. Operations division. Do not schedule anything that could appear to involve me. Her name stood on its own, as it had always stood, as it should have been allowed to stand from the beginning. The pilot program launched in February. 2 routes in the Cascades corridor, 1 on the coast. Data analysts scheduled to meet with warehouse supervisors and drivers before route finalization, not after. By April, the Northwest delay numbers had dropped 17%. A driver named Doug, 11 years with the company, emailed the operations desk in March. The email was 4 sentences. 3 of them said thank you in different ways. The 4th said, "First time I felt like anyone up there was actually listening." Ren printed it out and pinned it above her desk. It stayed there. Months passed. Portland moved through its seasons the way Portland does. Rain becoming less rain. Then the brief, surprised green of a Pacific Northwest spring. Then summer arriving cautiously, checking first to make sure it was welcome. Callum and Ren did not become whatever they were becoming quickly. Because they were both people who had learned, at some cost, the difference between moving at the right speed and moving at the speed that felt easiest, and because there was a professional reality that needed to be real before anything else could be. She reported to the operation division, not to him, but it needed to be clear. Not just technically clear, actually clear, the way things are clear when everyone involved has made a deliberate choice, rather than letting something happen by default. They were careful with each other, not distant. Careful. Which is what you are with something that matters. They talked after late meetings sometimes, in the building's small cafeteria on the 8th floor, which neither of them had gone to before October and both of them went to now. Not by arrangement, by the convergence of late hours and the fact that the coffee there was slightly better than the stuff on the training floor, and they both apparently needed coffee at 8 o'clock at night to function like reasonable adults. He told her about Sarah, not all at once and not as a story with a beginning and an end, in pieces. The granola bars she kept in her bag for patients who forgot to eat. The Subaru with the cracked dashboard she refused to replace because it still ran fine. The way she said things once and let them sit, and the things she said had a way of sitting for years. Ren told him about Vermont, about Owen, who had texted her in November to say the gas station had promoted him to assistant manager, and he didn't want her to make a big deal of it, which meant he did want her to make a big deal of it, which she did, at length, via voice message, until he told her to stop, and she could hear him smiling through the phone. She told him about her mother, who was walking again, slowly with a cane but walking, who had called in January to say she had gone to the grocery store by herself for the first time, and had cried in the cereal aisle, and Ren had cried on the phone with her, and neither of them mentioned it afterward. Because some things are private even between people who tell each other everything. They were careful. And then one evening in late March, they were both leaving the building at the same time by coincidence. Rode the elevator down together. Walked out into Portland rain, neither of them with an umbrella, because neither of them had planned to walk out together. They stood under the entrance awning. Ren said, "I want to show you something." She took him to the loading dock, level B3, the part of the building that the 44th floor never saw and rarely thought about. High ceilings, painted concrete floor. Dock doors closed against the rain. The scale of it, the functional honesty of a space built for work, rather than impression. She stood in the middle of it and turned to face him. "This is where it starts," she said. "Not up there, here. This is where you understand whether the system works or not. Whether the schedule is real or just a number. Whether the people running it have any way to tell anyone what they actually see." Callum looked at the space around them. He had been in this building for over 20 years. He had never been in this room. "I know," he said. "I know you know now," she said. "I wanted you to see it without a presentation. Without slides, just the room." He nodded. Looked at the dock doors. At the yellow painted lines on the floor, worn pale in the places where feet had traveled the same paths for years. At the ceiling high above them, designed for function, indifferent to aesthetics. Built to hold the weight of everything the building needed to receive. "Ray would have brought me here," he said. "Years ago, if I had asked." "Yes," she said, "he would have." They stood in the quiet of it. Then they walked back up through the building. Took the stairs for part of it, an old habit from the week that had apparently stayed with him, and came out on the 32nd floor. The training floor. Dark at this hour. Chairs stacked. Coffee station quiet. The glass-walled room where 18 people had spent a week learning things both listed and unlisted on the official program agenda. Ren stopped walking. Near the spot where on a Monday morning in October she had moved a chair because it was in a janitor's path and that was the thing to do. A wet floor sign was leaning against the wall nearby. Someone from the afternoon cleaning rotation had left it out. She looked at it, the yellow plastic, the black stick figure, the little warning that everyone stepped around and nobody read. Then she looked at Callum. He was already looking at her. "That whole week," he said, quiet, the voice he used when he was not performing anything at all. "You were the only one who actually saw me." Ren smiled. Not the careful smile she had practiced in mirrors before orientation. Not the smile she used when she needed a room to think she was fine. The real one, the tired one. The one that knew what it had cost to get here and was glad to have paid it anyway. "No," she said. "I saw a tired man who needed someone to move a chair out of his way. The rest I figured out later." Portland rain continued outside. Steady, unhurried. The freight train ran past somewhere below and the building shook its familiar small shake. Callum reached for her hand, the right one. The one that had healed now months ago, no trace of the cut left. But he took that hand, the one that had bled on a Thursday evening while the jazz played and everyone looked somewhere else. She let him. No hesitation, no performance, no calculation about what it meant or what came next. Just two people standing in a dark hallway on the 32nd floor of a building that was slowly, imperfectly, becoming something better than it had been. Both of them a little worn by the work of staying decent in spaces that had not always rewarded it. Both of them still standing. They walked out of the building together into the rain. Neither of them said anything. Because some things don't need framing. Some things just are, and this was one of them.